Firesides are a series of online conversations with friends of British Exploring Society. They give us a chance to tell amazing and unusual stories with an interested audience, and they help us bring together potential new friends for British Exploring Society. The themes of our Firesides resonate with our work as a youth development charity, and tonight we're joined by two remarkable individuals, explorers Ben Saunders and Robert Swan, who are going to talk to us about what they've learned through their experiences in wild and remote locations, and how those experiences have informed their convictions about our planet's future and the role of young people in fighting for a viable future for all of us on it. Ben and Rob will share their insights with a possible interjection from me, and then we'll be encouraging you all vigorously to join in the conversation with your questions to them both. Now, before we kick off, I need to remind you why we're all here. You don't have to have been to one of the poles to have had a transformative, life-defining experience in the outdoors. Here at British Exploring Society, we've been working since 1932 with young people, and now we in particular work with those least likely to be able to access the kind of privileging experiences which can make a massive difference throughout someone's adult life. We work with those from really diverse backgrounds, those facing educational and economic disadvantage, and those living with mental and physical impairment. And with the help of exceptional professional volunteer leaders, we help these young people find their fire. Their sense of value, personal value, agency, purpose and drive. Our young explorers stick with us as part of our community as members so that as they progress through life, they can continue to draw on the support of the fellow explorers they've had these transformative experiences with. And our work has never felt more urgent and relevant than right now, as I'm sure you would understand. With growing gaps, you might say ravines, in the life chances of young people from different parts of our small and First Nation island, those gaps should not be there. And we feel that we should be doing as much as possible to try and not only close that gap, but for all of our sakes, do everything possible to enable young people to be ready for the future. Now, here's a very, very brief video about what we do, after which I will introduce with more detail our remarkable guests for tonight.
British Exploring Society is always trying to find a new challenge for leaders and young people.
It made my world a lot bigger, and by that I've had a very restricted childhood, and I was from a poor background. I'd never been abroad. I didn't have a passport. I hadn't seen much of the world, and so my up until then, my world was very small.
While on expeditions, we are in amazing locations, in beautiful places that not many people have access to.
And what did it give me access to? I just noted a few words down, just the wildness of being in Svalbard, around mountains, the sense of being in a place that was untamed, climbing mountains that no one had ever climbed before. It's very difficult to put into words what that meant.
But before the trip, I was in a very bad headspace, despite having a supportive family. And by the time I got back, I found that actually, I know it's cheesy, but I'd really developed as a person, and I came out a lot more positive than I went in, and it's still kind of continued to the current day.
Going on expedition enhanced and developed my resilience, as I sort of now have had to sort of get on with life and not let sort of the uncertainty of life sort of put me down.
It has given me a great thing to look back on and reflect on, and without fail it puts a smile on my face thinking back of those memories on expedition, and it's kind of my go-to when I need to think of something positive and something that I appreciate.
I have so many incredible memories from different British exploring expeditions, and even from training weekends and meeting young explorers for the first time.
Being part of this community is being able to share one's experiences and being able to talk to lots of kind of like-minded people.
The community that makes up British Exploring is a wonderful mix of people from all age groups and with all sorts of levels of expertise, but with one common goal of providing great adventures and experiences for young people.
It's a group of people who for decades have been experiencing these same kinds of expeditions and learning the same sorts of things from them. And there's so much to learn from everyone you meet, all the leaders that come on expeditions, the young explorers themselves, everyone involved in the organisation has interesting stories to tell.
So Ben Saunders and Robert Swan are doers, not lookers on. They're also great communicators, a bit like the young people and leaders you've just seen speaking. And they've both delivered compelling TED Talks, which I commend to you all if you haven't already been riveted, inspired by them, although please wait until the end of this fireside. So in part, I'd like to introduce them using their own words. It gives a real flavour of the kind of individuals they are and also indicates why they like each other so much and have agreed to join us together. Ben will go on to explain how they're connected, why they inspire each other so much, and why their experiences have led them both to think a lot about the future, about future leadership and how they might inspire young people to take action for themselves. But to start with, here are just a few words about them both, starting with Ben. No one else is the authority on your potential. Words fall short. The doing, to try, to experience, to engage, rather than to watch and to wonder, that's where the meat of life is. I'm not particularly gifted. I'm not genetically freakish in any sense. I'm absolutely average. That's my interjection. My Antarctic expedition was just about doable, just feasible, and that's what's exciting to me. If I knew it was possible, if I knew I could do it without too much bother, I wouldn't be interested. And now a few words about Robert, including starting with his most famous quote: "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it." It began for me at the age of 11. I'm not an explorer, I'm just a survivor. To walk across a melting ocean of ice is without doubt the most frightening thing that's ever happened to me. We need to listen to what these places are telling us. We walked under a hole in the ozone layer in 1986 and my eyes changed colour. Robert is the first person to walk to both poles. He then wrote in the footsteps of Scott after his first Antarctic expedition. And Ben Saunders led the first return journey to the South Pole on foot via Shackleton and Scott's route. He holds the record for the longest human-powered polar journey in history and the longest solo Arctic journey by a Briton. Robert is a passionate advocate for the protection of Antarctica and for renewable energy, and he runs his own remarkable foundation, which we'll be hearing more about this evening. Ben has also contributed to World Changing, a user's guide to the 21st century, a compendium of resources and tools to build a better future, described as an inspirational call for action. They both work with and champion the importance of young people having access to experiences to shape their thinking and to help us all find sustainable solutions for the future. They know that those young people will need skills and resilience to tackle the challenges communities everywhere and our planet itself already faces. As Rob himself has said, to save, first you need to engage and to form a bond. Now, this seems to be true of Ben and Rob themselves. So over now to Ben to explain how their bond was forged and exactly what kind of lives they've both led. Thank you both.
God, Zoom has changed. I have to unmute myself. There we go. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you. I thought for a split second that you had said I was a doer and not a looker, and I was thinking maybe I should have brushed my beard a bit better or to put an even smarter shirt on the scene. But it's wonderful to be here. Many of you, like me, I'm sure, would be happy if you never heard the word webinar ever again. So I feel very honoured that you're with us on what might be for you. Well, it's clouding over here, but it's been a beautiful day in the UK. I know at least one of you is not in the UK, but thank you all. I was Googling about 10 minutes ago just to see where the adage "don't meet your heroes" comes from. And it's been traced back, I'm going to read this to you, here we go, to 1886, if not before. Louisa May Alcott. The youngest, aged 12, could not conceal her disappointment and turned away, feeling as so many of us have felt when we discover that our idols are very ordinary men and women. I am certainly pretty ordinary. I'm sure Rob would say the same thing. So you are going to meet two ordinary men this evening, but one of them, Robert Swan, is I was going to say hero. We're both English, so I can feel my toes curling up. But somebody who had a profound influence on my life before I even met him. And this part of my story goes back to 1993-ish, 16 years old, before the internet was even a thing. And I had a part-time job in a shop in Canterbury called Field and Trek, which might still be going, sells outdoor kit. And I walked into Canterbury Library one Saturday lunchtime and picked out a book. Now, this wasn't at random. I loved outdoorsy, adventure-y stuff already. I'd been in the Scouts, all that kind of stuff. But I picked up this book. Now, it's not this actual book, but it was identical, In the Footsteps of Scott. And it's a book that certainly, in a roundabout and eventual way, led to me having a transformative, life-defining experience in the outdoors. In fact, a number of them. So I'm going to talk a bit about what I've done, a bit about Robert's role in that in the early days and more latterly. As Carl said in the film just now, it ended up being strong experiences that made my world bigger. So what I'm hoping this evening is that Robert and I can share a bit of the worlds that we've been lucky enough to spend an awful lot of time in, and with a particular focus on Antarctica, which is a place that very few people ever have the chance to visit. And it's a place that, having been there a number of times now, is still impossible to put into words. So hopefully between us, we can try and do that somehow. But before that, I am going to show you a few holiday snaps. And I forget who's in charge. Amy Lee, are you in charge of the slides? Here we go. We've got some slides going. This is all remote control, no hands. Right, so I've literally put 6 photos in just to give you a whistle-stop tour of what it is that I do. Now, I am usually introduced as a polar explorer, which is a ludicrous job title. There are only 2 poles to explore, 2 geographic poles. They were both found a long time before I was born. So I still struggle for a job title. I normally say I specialize in dragging heavy things around cold places, and I've done a lot of that. Next slide, please. 12 big expeditions in the last 2 decades. Skied solo to the North Pole in 2004, 26 years old, took 10 weeks, 72 days on the Arctic Ocean, because if you are daft enough to try and walk to the North Pole, it's in the middle of the sea, 5.4 million square miles of ocean. So you have to walk over the sort of semi-frozen floating crust of pack ice. So that was a challenging camping trip. Next slide, please. So 12 expeditions, but it kind of started back in 2001. I was 23 years old, and I've very rarely shown this photo. I only unearthed it. It's a bit blurry, sorry, it's old. But I was 23. Clearly, my hair is on the sort of opposite side of my head back then. But I like this photo because this was me, sort of precocious young punk with a daft dream. I had borrowed the outfit that I'm wearing from a guy called Penn Haddo, who ended up helping me enormously in these sort of early days of my career. But the clothing belonged to him, the big boots belonged to him, the map belonged to him, and the sort of very bling Breitling watch was my first ever sort of sponsorship deal, except it was useless because they just lent me a watch and then asked for it back. I had no money. It didn't really help me get to the pole. But this was me sat on a bench in Hyde Park, I think doing something for a newspaper, trying desperately to raise the money for my first ever expedition. There've been 12 of them since then. Next slide, please. And for me, gosh, somebody asked me recently, what's your favorite, North Pole, South Pole? It's impossible to say, but Antarctica is a deeply special place, and that's a place that I'm hoping Rob and I can talk a bit more about this evening. This is, I think, October or November 2013, walking across an area called the Ross Ice Shelf, which is the same size as France, except unlike France, no hills, no valleys, no cheese, no wine, no cafes, no restaurants, nothing. If your impression of Antarctica has been based on the loads of wonderful documentaries, Life in the Freezer, March of the Penguins, Dynasties, all those, all those things, I think you may be misled. You'd be forgiven for thinking that Antarctica is overrun with fluffy penguins, which is not the case. The only penguins, seals, bird life that can exist down there basically lives on the beach or near the sea where there's food and the conditions are mildest. Once you get into the middle of this continent, nothing can live. And I did a whopping great camping trip back started in 2013, finished 2014, where my teammate Tarka Lepiniere, half French, you probably guess, and I walked from a place called Ross Island on the New Zealand side of Antarctica to the South Pole, and then back to Ross Island again. So 108 days, 3.5 months. Lockdown has been pretty easy after 108 nights in a tent sharing a pee bottle with one other bloke. But it was a magical journey. And it's a journey, next slide, please, that took us up and down the Beardmore Glacier, which is one of the largest valley glaciers on Earth, certainly one of the most remote. Took us a week to get up it. And Robert is one of very, very few living human beings to have walked up this thing many years before we did. But we would actually get text messages from him on our satellite phone, which was just one of the most magical and surreal things to be there. This is actually Tarka looking at a bit of 1965 US Geological Survey chart, sat on his sledge having a tea break, but to be standing there wearing my crampons in my sledge harness on the Beardmore Glacier, and Robert Swan sending me a text message on the sat phone, and just thinking back to sitting in the staff tea room, age 16, reading this book, thinking, God, I would love to do something like that one day. So I'm going to kind of wrap up. Next slide. This is kind of weird slide to finish on, because this was halfway for us. This was turning around at the South Pole to a peculiar anticlimax, because there's an enormous research station at the South Pole, sort of hive of activity. It's like stumbling across some weird sort of base out of a Star Wars movie. So a weird day for us. Turned around, walked 900 miles back to the coast again. I'm going to wrap up. I think it's one more slide, but I'm going to hand over to Robert. So, as I've said, someone that inspired me enormously before I'd even met him. I was lucky enough to meet my hero, and he has continued to inspire me. Not so much nowadays with the stuff he did decades ago, deeply impressive expeditions to both poles, but with his spirit, his determination, his resilience in the fight he's continuing to fight today. So I'm going to let him elaborate, but before we do that, hopefully, Amy Lee, if you're paused on the play button, we're going to show you a short video.
This is Rob Swan, day 29 of the last 300, and unfortunately disaster struck at dawn. I can't move, and it's over. It can't be. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, I cannot believe that I'm 97 miles from the South Pole, exactly, almost to the inch, where Shackleton, the British explorer, was forced to turn back in 1909 from the South Pole. He could have made the pole, but the team would have died. And I just thought, I can't do this again. They pulled me inside the tent and I couldn't move, and realised that was it. That after 1,460 miles on foot, 3 expeditions, 150 days of pulling a sledge, the dream was over. And I think that pain can just entirely take over your mind, and I felt very, really, 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 really negative, which is not a feeling I feel much. I think that it's false in life to say that your journey is just about a much bigger picture. It has to be inside you. And inside me there is a fierce determination to remember when I was 11 and reading the stories of Shackleton, Scott, Amundsen, all the great explorers, and hearing the story of Shackleton not being able to cross the Antarctic landmass, his ship never even made the edge of Antarctica, and that dream burned strongly in me to finish that job. And I hope that those last 97 miles on the Undaunted expedition will do that. It's working. The solar, the ice melter, everything's going really very well. So look at it, renewable fuel, burning perfectly. You only have one life. I think that doing what you say you're going to do counts. I'm giving everything I've got to keep up, everything. I've never tried harder in my life for anything. Good gracious, Ben.
Oh, I was muted again by the system. Gosh, Robert. Well, I've just realised I'd written a whole load of bullet points down of things I meant to say and explain, and I didn't do half of them. So I'm going to start by sort of well, you've already brought us back to Antarctica, but just by reiterating what a unique place this is. And it's, I think for me, one of the things that I still struggle to convey is the sheer scale of Antarctica, and it's roughly 10% of the entire Earth's surface. It's the size of China and India put together. And I'm not particularly good at maths, but Antarctica has roughly 26.5 million gigatons of ice, freshwater glacial ice. And I thought, well, what the heck's a gigaton? How can I get my head around this figure? And I started thinking about this last year and Googling, how many human beings are alive on the planet right now, roughly, do we think? How much ice, if I can figure out how to divide that by how many humans there are, how much ice in Antarctica do we each have, per human being? Is it 100 grams? Like, what's the answer? And the answer is 3 million tons of ice for every human being on the planet alive right now. So and I still, you and I, ice specialist, I still don't know what 3 million tons of ice looks like. So it's completely mind-boggling, and clearly the scale of this place and the scale of the consequence of what is happening to this place is uniquely significant to every human being, and yet only a handful of us have ever been to this place. So I was going to ask you, I've got a few questions. You described Antarctica, Rob, a few years ago at the wonderful TED talk you gave as such a hopeful place. I'd agree with that. I might come back to that later. Captain Scott said, great God, this is an awful place. Even looking at that film, it sounds like you might have had both ends of the spectrum just on that trip. And the Norwegian explorer Erling Kagge said, for me, Antarctica was a very good school. So I wanted to ask you what you've learned at that unique school.
Well, Ben, I'd just say one quick thing before I forget that we're here talking about climate change, and I think it's really important to underline that your fantastic journey to the North Pole, you could not do that now. There is no more ice to walk on during the summertime. And that's quite something. If you think that we went to the South Pole in '89, you went in the early 2000s, and you can't make that journey anymore. And I think that's a very, very important lesson from these great ice caps at both poles, that, you know, we need to listen to what they're saying. I think what I've learnt from Antarctica is, I think the really bottom line thing is that, as you correctly say, you know, when you've had the privilege to go through those things, and it is a privilege, even if it's a bad day, you know, it's our choice to do it, and people help us do it, that life after that, you really need to put as much as you possibly can back in. So I always feel, coming away from Antarctica, I feel inspired, but it makes me say, I've got to try harder, which was normally what my school report said every single term: must try harder. But it inspires me to try harder. And I think not a bad fact. I love your 3 million tons of ice per person. But if you look in terms of kind of square footage, each of us, all 7.5 billion of us, we all have an area in Antarctica that's ours, about the size of a football pitch. There's another idea on scale of this extraordinary place, and nobody owns it. The only place in the world we all own.
Yeah, this is and having like you, Rob, sort of been talking about myself and the things I've done in these places for a while now. The common reaction is sort of, why? And this sounds horrific. Like, why would you want to put yourself through these experiences? Yeah, it sounds like a really frightening, horrendous place to spend any time. Why would you want to go there and keep going back there? And to me, there is, I mean, you called it a hopeful place, and I think I can't think of a better term to use. To me, there is a profoundly inspiring side to Antarctica, and a story that isn't really told that well or understood by that many people. And that is, as you said, that nobody owns this place. It is governed remarkably well compared to anywhere else on this planet as the largest nature reserve on Earth. No claims of sovereignty, never had a war. And one of the things I love about the place is, if you are lucky enough to rock up there one day, no one checks your passport, because it becomes irrelevant. So so much of the stuff that we humans bicker about the whole time becomes irrelevant when you get down there, if you get down there one day. And the only thing that matters is your ability to get on with your fellow human beings in a place that necessitates that. It's a place where you have to get on with others. You have to be able to rely on your colleagues, your teammates, whoever you're there with, because it's a place that sometimes it's well, most of the time it's not particularly conducive to any sort of life, let alone human life. So it's a challenging place, but it's also, to me, I love that forced sort of human collaboration. It's a problem that always, it's a place that always gives you problems to solve, and you've got to rely on the people around you. And it doesn't matter what it says in your passport or, you know, all that stuff.
And I love that, Ben. You know, you're a much better person with words than I am. But I think for me, it's also the most lethal, dangerous, silent force on the planet. And if we melt Antarctica, whether it's 3 million tons per person, we're going to swim. And the entire climate of our planet will change. And people are talking about Greenland. Ben, you've crossed it and done all kinds of things up there. And we've talked about the Arctic Ocean. But in terms of impact per ton of ice, it's nothing up there compared to what we've talked about with Antarctica. So I feel quite creepy when I'm in Antarctica, especially walking, you know, and I have to say in front of you that it seems rather pathetic that, you know, I had 600 miles to go to cross the Antarctic landmass, thought I could do it, being a bit arrogant, But, you know, at 108 years of age, I sort of found out that, you know, things wear out, and a few hip injuries. You know, I've got 97 miles to complete that journey, when you sort of did it in a couple of weeks or so. But, you know, that's another story. But I'm going to go back and finish the job, because I think dreams should be held, as you well know and say much better than I do. But when I'm standing there, I'm quite frightened by the force of Antarctica. And as you know, one always feels that this place wants you dead when you're there. And if you don't respect it, you're not going to come home. But I feel there's another element now, which is saying, you know, all of us are going to be in serious condition on the face of the planet unless we actually, you know, can reverse the trend of major climate change. It feels like it's trying to tell us something. If we don't listen, it'll take us down.
Absolutely. Now, I want to sort of somehow try and bring this back to, in a way, to British exploring. We are here talking for, supporting wonderful charity that I've tried to do as much as I can for a long time now. That really is about enabling young people to have the kind of experiences that we've had, perhaps on a sort of on steroids almost. But I know you and I cut our teeth in the hills in the UK, and actually a lot of the stuff that you learn there is directly applicable to Antarctica. But ultimately, we had transformational experiences in the outdoors. So I wonder, Rob, just to finish on a pop-up, because I'm hoping we've got lots of questions, but I wonder, Rob, if you'd be happy, it says 2041 on your top, just to talk about a bit of the work that you're doing now, and particularly when it comes to what you've done so far when it comes to taking young people to Antarctica, and maybe some of the lessons that have come out of that, and the effects you've seen in the young people you've worked with.
Well, I think very quickly that, you know, I do believe that the last great exploration, Ben, and anybody's listening, the last great exploration is to survive on Earth. And actually the future leaders of that are coming from the ranks of people like the BES, the young leaders. We need those people to go out, become climate witnesses, come back and inspire other people. That's what excites me about BES and what's possible to achieve with these fantastic young people. For my own part, I was given a mission 30 years ago, which is a bit worrying, by Jacques Cousteau to try and preserve Antarctica. And in 2041, that's when the world will decide as to whether to destroy Antarctica or leave it alone as a natural reserve land for science and peace. And I've taken thousands of young people from all over the world to Antarctica to become those witnesses, to see it from 80 odd different countries, from many, many different diverse backgrounds, you know, every single color under the sun, fantastic young people, more women, I might say, than men have come with us over the last 15 years, and they go back home and they take it on. And I think working locally on the issue of climate change in their countries, but always having that bigger picture, Ben, of remembering that in 2041, it's game on. And I will remind them, however old I am in 2041, on the phone, game on, let's get the job done.
Brilliant. Thank you. Honor, I'm hoping there might be some questions. There's a danger here that Rob and I will end up swinging the lantern and you know, comparing notes.
Thank you both. And I was going to follow on in sort of two different directions, if that's all right. The first is actually the refreshing way in which, much though you might talk about swinging the lanterns, for two such extraordinary high achievers, your reluctance to behave like alpha males and talk about the things that you've summited, peaked and stuck flags in is immensely refreshing, and your appetite instead to talk about kind of beauty and the things that you've loved, or even awe or imagination, is inspiring. And actually I'll start with one of those questions and then move on to something potentially slightly trickier. And that question is actually from a member of the audience. You'd love to hear your descriptions of the night skies in the southern and northern lights of the poles. So which feeds straight into that idea of awe and beauty. So I don't know which of you or either of you would like to talk about that.
Well, I was going to say possibly a trick question, but Rob, I'll let you go.
Well, I was lucky enough You know, in our day, which sounds a bit old-fashioned, you know, we couldn't fly to Antarctica, and now we can, which is fantastic. Satellite phones, it's all heaven. But in those days, you had to actually go there, like Scott Shackleton Amundsen, and live in a smelly hut for 9 months. And what was extraordinary is that in the middle of that winter time, June, July time, you went outside the hut and it was almost like daylight because of the southern lights. Unbelievable, just spectacular beauty, dreamlike. Did you really believe you were still on the same planet? And I'm sure, Ben, you must have seen the Northern Lights, so I'll leave for you to do the Northern Lights.
Yeah, gosh, yeah. Well, I've never seen darkness in Antarctica, and got what I was going to say, what a special thing, probably what a grim thing in some ways to overwinter it in a hut you built yourself, but it got extraordinary. And yeah, I can't comment on darkness in Antarctica because I've never seen it. We had 24-hour daylight for nearly 4 months when I was down there, 2013, 2014. But the high Arctic, North Pole, I've seen the Northern Lights from sort of relatively easy places to get to, top of Norway, that kind of thing. But I did see them in Siberia, heading out to the start line of my first ever North Pole expedition, North Pole attempt. We didn't get there in 2001. And I remember sort of running to get my camera and trying to take some photographs. None of them came out. But it was stunning. I mean, like so much of the stuff, impossible to put into words. But the other thing that occurred to me was starting my big North Pole trip in 2004, which was sort of in February, so early in the season, and the sun is still very low. And I've got you can't see it because it's behind my camera, but it's a photo on my wall taken by the wonderful Martin Hartley. He was with me up to the start line of that trip taking photographs, and it's a photo taken out of a Russian helicopter of another helicopter. We had 2 helicopters landing on the ice and sort of looking north onto the Arctic Ocean. And you can even there, you can see a little bit of open water in February, but the sun is still below the horizon. And people often say, you know, didn't you get bored of all that white? And I try to think back to the first week or two of that big trip on the Arctic Ocean, where there was almost no white. You get these incredible colors. And this photo, I wish I could pick up my monitor and flip it around, but sort of oranges and creams and yellows and blues, and it's a magical place. And one of the wonderful things about being there on my own for a while, but also one of the really difficult things to convey, is the knowledge that the scenery that I was seeing for 72 days of my life, no one else has ever seen in that particular combination of ice, you know, pack ice features, which can be stunning on a nice-ish day, and no one else can ever see that ever again. So I spent 10 weeks on planet Earth seeing incredible, you know, places that no one's ever seen, no one else seen. So it's a special place. I've gone way off piste, but I've Northern Lights a couple of times.
Okay, so you talked very passionately about the idea that you have to create relationships and a connection, and that idea of kind of climate witnesses to drive change. But we've also seen those fairly unedifying pictures of people queuing up Everest. So when do we not go? When does someone who wants to visit, even as a witness, have to make the decision that to go is the wrong decision? Has that ever been a case for either of you? And it must be a question you are asked more and more often.
Well, I think that from my case, Ben, you can answer that. I think it's important when I see the people climbing Everest, you have to ask why they're there. That's a question they have to answer. Let's not go into that one. But I think when it comes to what Ben and I do, which is to take limited amounts of people on ships to these places, yes, you have to respect the place. Yes, you have to do the right thing. But if you imagine that there's 4,000 people out there who are willing to sacrifice, commit, put their own money where their mouths are to help preserve the place they went to see, I'm happy with that. I think that Antarctica protects itself quite well, because it's a pretty grim place to go most of the year, rough weather, and it is a very expensive place to go. So it's not like something you take a sort of weekend break to go to Antarctica. No, it's a big deal. It's a lot of money, and anybody who goes, in my book, comes away with that sense we must preserve this last great wilderness left on Earth. So I've never faced the don't go issue, but I do believe that a lot of people who go and tick things off, that people who use the great outdoors for their own benefit, in other words, they've broken a record, or they've done this, or they're skiing down some impossible slope, or going on a bicycle at 500 miles down some hill to break a record, that's fine. But I think they should make damn sure that they are helping preserve the places that give them that name of being, as Ben and I don't like to be called, the explorer. Give something back everywhere you go. That's my take on it.
Thank you.
Gosh.
We've got lots of questions coming in. Ben, did you want to add to that? Or
No, that was perfect. Put it better than I could.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, brilliant.
A couple of very specific questions in relation to climate change. Actually, lots of questions in relation to climate change, and then a brilliant question from a young explorer. The first is in relation to the specific impact of climate change on Arctic communities, which actually was addressed by a British Museum exhibition recently as well, which is, how do you think climate change will change Arctic communities specifically? And then added on to that for a separate question, which is, do you believe that the pandemic has had a negative impact on our ability to reach our targets in relation to global warming?
I can handle a bit of that, Ben. Maybe you can deal with the communities. I think that 7%, I hate all these figures, but, you know, a bit, let's say 7%, there was a reduction in our carbon output, which is not bad, but it's not enough. So I think that my real question is, yes, I think the world showed how resilient and how it can recover very fast. I won't go into the details. Everybody knows the dolphins came back to Venice and people could breathe in Delhi for the first time for 100 years. I just think it's important that when people are talking about going back to normal, that they understand that that normal was no damn good. So to go back, we need to go back in a different way from the pandemic episode in all of our lives. And I think that's a really important thing. Let's not just say, hey, let's go back to how it was, because how it was really wasn't very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, gosh. The first thing that popped into my head thinking about communities actually is not really a community, but it's another enormous swathe of the planet that is hard to get your head around. And this was something last month, late last month. I saw a random thing on Twitter from a quite obscure French glaciologist that I follow, and he'd posted some data up about what was happening to the weather that week in Russia, particularly in Siberia, so the north of Russia, and temperatures were at that point 20 degrees centigrade warmer than they were in the UK. There were places that I'd traveled through 15 plus years ago on my way out to the edge of the Arctic Ocean that at that point in time were, I'm looking at some of the numbers here, 33.6 degrees C, 33.4, 30.5, 31.9. This is in the Arctic. This is the Russian Arctic, Siberia, and there is 10 million square kilometers of permafrost up there. That's 40 times the size of the UK. So again, I've gone off piece. That's not talking about a specific community, but I think for me the challenge here, a big part of the challenge is this is a storytelling challenge, because I think ultimately we humans we're sort of narrative creatures. We're not really inspired by data, and there is so much profoundly alarming data coming out of climate science, particularly in Antarctica, at the pace and the scale at which things are changing, and yet we're not really changing. Actually, in the grand scheme of things, we are nowhere close to achieving the sort of results, making the sort of changes that we need to be making if we've got a hope of leaving this planet in a habitable condition for future generations. So I think it's a storytelling challenge. And I've lost my thread because I've just seen someone say epic beard in the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So now this is from a young explorer, Evan, and this might in part be answered to help you answer that question. It's a great question, which is he suggested might be for either of you. And it says his dream is to become a polar explorer and to help young people overcome their struggles in life through exploration. What advice would you give him to fulfill that dream?
Well, I'll start, if you don't mind, Ben. I think that young, is it a young chap or young lady who's asked the question?
Yes, it's Evan, and another one now
Evan.
from another young person saying they'd
Okay.
like to visit Antarctica in an environmentally conscious way.
Well, I think to both of you, what's important is that you have every right to be really angry at the state of the planet that we've left you. And I'm really sorry for that. You have every right to be angry, but for any expedition, for any journey that you make, we can't just feed off being angry. It doesn't get us anywhere. Ben knows that. You're not angry on an expedition with each other. You have to work together with each other. You have to look for solutions, not anger and frustration. And I think that there is a trend now in our world, especially using social media, where young people are standing up and they're pointing fingers, they're very angry, and it's all criticism, complaints, and anger. That won't get us anywhere. So my advice to you, if you wish to be part of that last great exploration left on Earth to survive on Earth, is to go on journeys where you're helping promote the solutions to the issue. Quite honestly, I think there are enough scientists out there who've told us about the problem. We need to focus on what we can do about it. And that's where I see the BES, young leaders being these people are saying, right, yeah, we go to these places. Now this is what we can do about it, and inspire people, even the small things they can do, we can make a difference, and we have to.
Fantastic. Ben, anything you'd like to add?
We'll come back to the wanting to be a polar explorer. My first thing would be to repeat what my stepdad told me a long time ago, which is it's a ludicrous thing to do, and the thought you could ever make a living from polar expedition. I came back from my first ever expedition in a lot of debt, and luckily I'm quite stubborn, and I tend, if someone tells me I can't do something, or something is impossible, or I'm not going to be able to do it, I tend to become sort of more determined. So it worked out okay in the end, but I've certainly spent more time in meetings, trying to raise money, in Excel spreadsheets, conference calls, than I have on skis. Robert, I've stuck some things in your book from years and years ago. And I was just thinking through, and I found a line here, which I mean, your experience was far tougher than mine. Just the scale of the amount of money you were trying to raise back in the 80s. But there's a lovely bit here saying, I remembered writing out a personal check for the first payment on the warehouse when we had no money and did not know where the next was coming from. It was a bleak time, begging gas cylinders from local supplier with the promise of payment next week. A time of constant soul searching about the commitment other people were making to an enterprise that had nothing to show for itself. Even now, when I'm asked what was the toughest aspect of the whole expedition, I can truthfully answer, it was receiving letters from schoolboys that said, "Dear Mr. Swan, please don't get cold. Here's 10p." And it goes on, but it's clearly Robert and I are living proof that being doing this stuff, making a career, bizarrely somehow scraping a living out of doing this stuff is not impossible. So gosh, what would my advice be? It would be to try and do as much as you can close to home, and I say that because for me there was a sort of long apprenticeship, and a lot of the really important lessons I learned long before I got anywhere near Antarctica or Greenland or the Arctic Ocean. I learned a lot of them in the Scouts. I probably learned more useful stuff in the Scouts than I did at school, where I didn't pay a lot of attention at all. So my advice would be to spend as much time as you can just being outdoors, doing challenging things, close to home, and don't be afraid to ask people for advice. Do what you've done now. That was a big lesson for me. I wrote to Robert out of the blue. I wrote to Ralph Fiennes. I wrote to Chris Bonington. I wrote to all my heroes when I was a teenager, and they all wrote back. And they've all continued to be incredibly helpful and supportive. So don't be afraid to ask. Try and get in touch with people. Ask their advice. I'm going to stop rambling there, but you can track me down. So Honor will give my email. I will happily help more.
Yes, I'll basically share it on Facebook. I think that thing about planning and endurance, definitely. The number of years that you both between you have clocked up in planning massively outstrips the number of years, as you say, you've spent dragging heavy things. Which takes me to the next question, which is, Robert, you spent, I think, 7 or 8 years planning to actually remove 1,500 tons, is that right, of scrap from what we describe as the pristine wilderness of Antarctica, which might come as a shock to people. And it struck me, and obviously others, that there's some parallels between that and the amount of scrap that seems to be swinging around in space. And that idea that, I mean, I know there are astronauts, for example, are there not, who are members of the Explorers Club as well. I mean, are there any parallels between that idea of the sort of the outer space agreement and the idea that space should be a pristine and safe environment in the same way that Antarctica should? But actually, there are just as many problems going on in space as well. I mean, do you think there's anything that the two environments can learn from each other? Should we be working more closely with astronauts?
I think that, being very simple, as Ben always says, that you've got to start somewhere. So there I was given this mission by Jacques Cousteau, 50-year mission, Rob, get on with it, no budget. And then sadly we lost him, he died. I thought, what do I do? Well, I ought to go and clear up some rubbish. And very kindly the question said 7 years in planning. No, it was 7 years to do it. And millions of dollars working with the Russian government. But something I felt, and I think, again, it goes back to our young explorers, is that, practicality is inspiring. Some big fancy 4-hour speech about what we should all be doing. I felt it was important to if we were trying to preserve Antarctica, to go and clean it up. So that was the reason we did that. It was very annoying and, probably one of the worst things I've ever done and won't do again, but we did it. The link to space, I think, is a very important one. We test out a lot of NASA equipment, especially when we're running only on solar at the South Pole and trying to survive off renewables. But I think that with space, it's terribly important that what we're putting up there is some accountability, that it should come back. And I don't really think that that's the case right now, but there are some steps in the right direction. And, I think Ben and I both probably know astronauts personally. They're extraordinary people, literally been out there. And I think that we should work with them to try and make sure that the more and more things that go up there, the richest man in the world is about to go to space for 5 minutes. Well, what's going to happen to his gear? Will it be up there for the next 40 years? Well, the answer is, if you're going to go up there and spend that sort of money, you should bloody well clean up, excuse the language, for your participation in doing something like that. So I'm all up to work with making sure that space stays in some way pristine. And then the question will be, who owns space? So possibly what we learn and what Ben and I can do to make sure we preserve Antarctica could be, a step in the right direction for the biggest global commons ever. That's the universe.
Possibly your next campaign, Rob?
Well, no. I'm going to hand over to Ben. I'm going to go and look for some warmer places.
Putting my space helmet on. There is. I've just been Googling to fact check this because I had a feeling, Honor, you mentioned the Outer Space Treaty, and there is a thing called the Outer Space Treaty, and I had a sneaky feeling it was based on the Antarctic Treaty, and this is actually true. So the Antarctic Treaty sort of written up late 50s. first signed in 1959, came into effect early 61. And here we go, addressing the General Assembly on September 22nd, 1960. So Antarctic Treaty was sort of just being put together, just being signed. President Eisenhower proposed that the principles of the Antarctic Treaty be applied to outer space and celestial bodies. So that's where this thing came from. So there is a literal link between Antarctica and how we're now looking at space and celestial bodies. If whoever's first to land on Mars, who has a claim to Mars, well, actually, it's going to be roughly the same system that applies to Antarctica. No claims of sovereignty. So I love the fact there's that literal connection. And to me, there's also a bit of a sort of slightly romantic, slightly idealist connection when I think of Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, Nansen, those sort of Edwardian pioneers. For Scott and Shackleton, those expeditions must have had, I think, a lot in common with the idea of someone flying to Mars in a few years' time. Yeah, they were sailing away from home for 3 years at a time. Certainly, with the earlier expeditions, Scott's Discovery, Shackleton's Nimrod, they had no idea what was in the middle. They knew this was a vast continent, but no idea what was in the middle of this place. So there's a sort of exactly. And as Robert was saying, I think Antarctica, coming back to the sort of hopeful side, the hopeful message, the hopeful example that Antarctica is sort of setting us all. I think it's sort of literally and metaphorically is a fascinating case study, template for how we can do better as a species, we human beings, and if we do make it to somewhere else one day, Mars, wherever, then let's try and treat it in the same way that we've preserved Antarctica so far.
What a fantastic place to Robert, did you want to say anything else? Because that's a fantastic
I just feel that any young explorers watching, Ben and I held on to our dream and we never let it go. And if you really wanted to make things happen in life, you don't have to walk to the North and South Pole. But I think that he and I have shown, if you really want to make something happen, hang on to it, don't give up. And I've been delighted to be part of today. It's been such fun.
Oh, both of you, thank you so much, and for such brilliant questions. I think Kyle, who you saw speaking earlier on the video, Kyle, one of our explorers, when he went to Iceland with us, he felt it was another world, another planet to him. And I know parts of Iceland can feel like that. I'm really struck by how explorers can be fixers. They can actually make the world a better place through their experiences, because explorers and entrepreneurs and dreamers are kind of made of the same cloth. The difference is that, unlike a lot of dreamers, explorers actually, forgive my language, get shit done. And the idea that the work that you do could actually have an influence on how we don't not just goodness save precious parts of our planet, but create a model for saving what's going on around our planet is a very exciting place to end. Thank you both so much. Without the work of people like you, we will all be in trouble, and our future, a British Exploring Society, and the work we do more broadly really does depend on doers. And we're having conversations, exciting conversations like this, not just in our firesides, but also across our community, because promoting solutions, as Rob so aptly put it, is going to be critical for our future as an organisation, and being responsible about the way that we continue to help young people be explorers in their own lives is going to have to change, and we're very excited about those changes. So if that excites any of you who've joined us this evening, come and find out more and help us to make sure we're still around in 2032 or 2041, and hopefully after that. It's been such a privilege to spend time with you. If you'd like to find out more about what we do, please go and visit our website. But in the meantime, it's such a privilege to hang out with you both, and please keep doing. We need more of you. Everyone else, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and have a fabulous evening, and we'll hopefully see you all again soon.